So good morning, guten Morgen. My name is Brad Jensen. I am a professor here at the McDonough School of Business. I also serve as director of the Ismarian program in Business and Global Affairs and co-director of our Masters in International Business and Policy program. And on behalf of all my colleagues here at Georgetown, I would like to extend a heartfelt and warm, on a brisk morning, welcome here to Georgetown. We are delighted you are here with us this morning. It is great to see business leaders, policymakers, and leaders from civil society here together to discuss the energy transition. We at Georgetown believe that to address these society-level problems like climate change, it's imperative that those three sectors, business, government, and civil society, work together. That any of those three alone cannot achieve society-level change. That is why here at Georgetown, we have developed a number of joint programs that their intention is to train future leaders who are comfortable at the nexus of those three sectors, comfortable working in any of those sectors. We have an undergraduate program, our Ismarian program in Business and Global Affairs, that is a joint program between our business school and our School of Foreign Service. We also have a master's in International Business and Policy, which is also joint between our School of Foreign Service and the business school. The program today exemplifies what we are trying to achieve in these programs. And it's no surprise that one of our International Business and Policy alums is the driving force behind this conference. So while I could talk all day about our programs, what we find is that our students are our best ambassadors. So I am delighted to introduce the driving force between the U.S. German Hydrogen Forum, our MAIBP class of 2023 alum, Chris Perry. Chris.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jensen, for those words. I would also like to welcome everyone to the U.S. German Hydrogen Forum. We sincerely appreciate that so many of you came out in person on a very cold and snowy day here in DC, but we're equally grateful for well over 60 people who have dialed in online from both sides of the Atlantic. My name's Chris Perry. I'm a Master's of Arts in International Business and Policy student here at Georgetown. In just a minute, I'll explain to you how that ties into this event. But what this event strives to do is to nurture a dialogue between policy, industry, finance, and climate experts from America and Germany. And in doing so, illuminate the economic and global value chain implications of a U.S. and German cooperation in hydrogen. Before I yield the stage to our experts, I would just say a few words about my background and how we all came to be here today. So for context, I'm American with German heritage, but that's not really something that I invested in until well after my undergraduate. I had started a career at that point in wealth management, but I felt awkward and a bit conflicted about a requirement that I advise clients on the best global investments for their life savings. I had a purely American perspective, and as I reflected, I realized that I actually wanted to understand global markets and provide objective perspective to my clients. I felt that I needed to walk a different path, so I sought some out. I applied to several opportunities that I thought would broaden my perspective by going outside of the country. Eventually, I was informed that I had been selected as a Congress Bundestag Young Professionals Exchange Fellow, CBYX, to spend a year in Germany. CBYX, known in Germany as the Parlamentarisches Patenschaftsprogramm, PPP, was founded during the Cold War to increase cultural understanding and ties between the U.S. and Germany. Both governments fund this program. viewing CBYX as a mechanism which undergirds the future of their bilateral transatlantic relationship. Every year, both countries send 75 young professionals as citizen ambassadors to the other nation. And each nation reminds fellows when they embark that citizen ambassadorship means representing the spirit, values, and diversity of perspectives from their home country. That citizen-led engagement is a powerful tool to create dialogue and opportunity. During the program, fellows are immersed culturally, educationally, and professionally, finding an internship in their newly learned language. I was so privileged that during my experience, I really saw everything in all the regional realities within Germany. I lived in West Germany in Cologne. I lived in East Germany in Leipzig, and I even worked in the very cool capital city of Berlin. The people that I spoke with and worked with, they shared with me how they understand Germany, its domestic challenges, its history, its place in the world, and where it's headed in the future. It was at this time that I first heard Germans talking about hydrogen. They called hydrogen the fuel of the future and a technology which would mitigate the effects of climate change. I didn't know much about it, but I stored that away for future reference. Following CBYX, the employer from my internship phase, Ernst & Young Parthenon, actually offered me a job to return to Berlin and work full-time. I was excited, if not a bit intimidated at the prospect of indefinitely living expat life in Germany. However, I was emboldened by my experience on the fellowship, and so I jumped in. For the next 5 years, I worked with Ernst & Young Parthenon and subsequent German firms specializing in mergers and acquisitions execution, corporate strategy, and operations. I helped German and multinational businesses navigate and execute some of their most complex business challenges. Often these projects had a cross-border scope. They involved policy influence, or they dealt with innovative or digital business models. I saw firsthand before and during the pandemic how policy and global market realities can impact business and investment. I experienced how diverse multinational teams can work together to successfully navigate uncertain situations. So during the pandemic, I relocated back to the US. It was a time of change for many. But when I moved back, I sought out my next challenge, and that led me here to Georgetown. This Master's of International Business and Policy between the School of Foreign Service and the School of Business combines and helped me to lend formal context to some of the things I had experienced abroad. But really, this social action project, which Professor Jensen alluded to, allowed me to work on a thesis which could make a positive impact in a topic of German-American relations. Georgetown's Baratta Center of Global Business, Responsible Alpha, and the representative of German industry and trade are my collaborators and co-organizers that help bring that kernel of knowledge that I had about hydrogen to life. That thing that I had learned during my first year in Germany. And by leveraging their unique knowledge base and networks at literally the perfect time to look at U.S. German hydrogen relations, we found that hydrogen is a promising, clean, and flexible technology, which offers potential low-carbon pathways for many industries. When we started, the U.S. was finalizing policy, funding access, and tax credits, 45B, for clean hydrogen projects. German industry had already launched more hydrogen projects than any other country. And the government had carefully constructed a global network of bilateral agreements that dealt with green hydrogen. But there was also uncertainty. Clean hydrogen currently faces high production and consumption costs, and there are questions about market scale and sustainable demand. Policy often defines the conditions for business, but business ultimately advances innovation, drives down costs, in the long run, creates jobs and economic output, while integrating those technologies into international value chains. Our event today will focus on that intersection of business and policy and channel the spirit of diplomacy, bearing in mind that in extraordinary times, it often takes extraordinary cooperation to answer daunting and complex challenges, which is why we've structured the agenda. Scan the QR code on the table if you don't have the agenda. To capture voices from both sides of the Atlantic. Our keynote address from the Department of Energy will look at some of the U.S. perspective. Then we'll be followed by a panel of experts in U.S. and German policy and hydrogen cooperation. And then we'll follow that with another panel of experts that will look at the breadth of perspectives along the hydrogen value chain. So to close, to my co-organizers, my contributors, speakers, and our audience, a very sincere thank you. I'm deeply honored to present the U.S. German Hydrogen Forum and would like to introduce today's keynote speaker, Dr. Sunita Satyapal, Director, Hydrogen and Fuel Cells Technology Office, U.S. Department of Energy, Director, Hydrogen Interagency Task Force, U.S. Government.
First of all, thank you so much to the organizers, to the hosts, and really for organizing this important event. And as we just heard, this is such a critical time. So I'm really honored to present a quick overview and food for thought for more discussion throughout the day. But first, let me ask, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very familiar with hydrogen and fuel cells, how many here are, let's say, a 6 or higher? Okay, so maybe about 30% or so. Great. So I've been in this field for more than 2.5 decades, actually almost 3 decades, and both in government and industry, lots of R&D, business development, lots of international collaboration as well. So what I wanted to do is give you some high-level perspectives and really just emphasize the urgency, obviously our climate crisis, energy security, resiliency, economic situation, just the world situation here. So again, a big thank you to all the organizers and all of you for coming. And then I'll talk about our national goals, the U.S. National Clean Hydrogen Strategy and Roadmap, and then some examples of our activities and areas of collaboration. So if we start with kind of the big picture, as a reminder, we have U.S. energy consumption shown here. And you can see it's a little bit hard to see here, but renewables are at about 13%. But basically, for the first time a couple of years ago, renewables at 13% surpassed coal, which was about 10%. And you can see the diverse options. But you can also see we rely very heavily on fossil fuels, which is here. And to reiterate the Biden administration goals of net zero by 2050, really ambitious interim goals as well. As you can see, a clean grid by 2035. And it's not just what the goals are, but how we actually achieve them that I want to emphasize right up front. And so, for example, in other countries call it the just transition. Energy environmental justice is such a high priority. So for instance, our Justice 40 initiative, where 40% of specific federal investments would benefit disadvantaged communities. So again, that's kind of really big picture. And so that's energy consumption. And if we look at CO2, over 5 billion, 6 billion tons basically. And so this breaks out in the US, the contribution of each of the different sectors for CO2. And overlaid is our national goals. So this is the challenge of a lifetime, right? So how do we get to net zero? And we have to address all of the challenges. We need all the tools in the toolbox. So batteries, renewables, nuclear, fossil with CCS. And so it's going to all of the above strategy. But the key is when we look at hydrogen, it offers that versatility. And there are opportunities across each of these sectors. So for example, heavy duty transportation, industrial applications, energy storage to enable renewables. So the key here is hydrogen has a role to play if we're going to get to net zero, and many other benefits as well. So I think all of you, are very aware of this, but I want to emphasize again the recent legislation highlights. So bipartisan infrastructure law, which provided over $60 billion to DOE, and $9.5 billion of that's for hydrogen. I'll talk a little bit about that. And then, of course, the Inflation Reduction Act, lots of tax credits, of course, not just 45V, there are others as well. And then really talk about the national hydrogen strategy and roadmap. And our secretary released a draft last year and got public comment. We had lots of stakeholder input, including international input. And so the 3 main components of the strategy, and how many of you have seen the national strategy? Okay, not too many. So again, this is not our strategy, DOE strategy or government strategy. It's all of our collective national strategy. And so the three components are really target hydrogen for those really strategic high impact uses. So those hard to decarbonize sectors like heavy duty transportation, industrial applications. The second is laser focus, and we have to reduce the cost. Of course, we have tax credits, we have lots of incentives, but we have to make sure that we have low cost hydrogen and sustainable market. And the third is this regional network concept. That's where the hydrogen hubs come in. You know, we're not going to build a huge national network at the moment, but how do we really get to scale, locate production and use? And then there are many enabling activities like workforce development, safety codes and standards, and so forth. So that's kind of the high level. And what I'll do is I'll really quickly walk through each one of these components so everyone's familiar. And basically, the bottom line is our national goals are 10 million metric tons of clean hydrogen by 2030, double that by 2040, and then 5 times that by 2050. And if we can get clean hydrogen up to that level, not just production, but end use, that would enable about 10% of the total emissions reduction. Again, if we're trying to get to net zero, 10% of that could be due to hydrogen. So that's, you know, pretty significant if we can get things right. So the goal here is really start with existing industries. So we already produce 10 million metric tons roughly of hydrogen for ammonia, for refineries. There's a lot of uncertainty here. So, you know, a lot of interest in exports and so forth, but that's what the dashed line represents. And then over time, you can see some of these additional market segments that start to become competitive. But the key here I want to emphasize is we've done tons and tons of analysis, lots of feedback, and there's a lot of uncertainty. So we emphasize in the strategy, you can see here that the dark green represents 4 scenarios of how much hydrogen we could get across these different sectors. And then the light green represent optimistic or more conservative scenarios, again, depending on how the market evolves. So again, the key message kind of at a high level is this is where we see the opportunity for hydrogen. So the second strategy is really focused on cost reduction. And if you look at, you know, this is one example of thousands of survey inputs from stakeholders. And there are many challenges to hydrogen. I really don't want to overhype, you know, infrastructure, incentives, safety. But the number one is that's highlighted is cost. So again, we have to reduce cost. And hopefully you all are familiar, a couple of years ago when the president asked our Secretary of Energy, what more can we do to really accelerate progress? And that was the beginning of the Energy Earthshot Initiative. Let me ask, how many of you are familiar with the Energy Earthshot Initiative? Okay, not even half. So this was, you know, similar to the moonshot from over half a century ago, this, you know, really big, bold national goals to help, you know, galvanize the entire community. So this easily articulated goal, hydrogen was the first one, was 111, so $1 for 1 kilogram of clean hydrogen within 1 decade. And again, today, hydrogen is like $1.50 in the US from natural gas. And so if we're really going to be competitive, long-term, sustainable, clean hydrogen, we have to get to, you know, our goal is to try to get below that. Again, looking at many different pathways. But so that's one of the major initiatives that we have going on. The baseline cost, by the way, when we launched this was roughly $5 kilogram for electrolysis. And there's lots of assumptions there, lots of variation, but it gives you an idea of, you know, how far we need to go. And then finally, the third strategy is focus on the regional networks. And so the legislation says, you know, we have to have hydrogen producers, end users, and the connective infrastructure in between. That's the by statute. And we got thousands of pages, literally 5,000 pages of feedback from industry, global industry, as we developed this program, set up a whole new office of clean energy demonstrations, and gives you an idea of kind of where we could potentially have these clusters of production and end use across the country. And then, of course, you all saw the big announcements with the president announcing the 7 hubs for $7 billion. And we also set aside, stay tuned, hopefully very shortly, the announcement on the up to $10 billion to help to incentivize offtake for the hubs. And so that's the total of $8 billion. So all these are still in the process of being negotiated. Our OSED office is we'll continue to release information as we finalize. And so the next thing I thought I'd cover is this whole of government approach. And how many of you have heard of the launch of the Hydrogen Interagency Task Force? Okay, not too many. So this was a really big deal. And last year in August, the White House and Deputy Secretary launched this with 11 agencies across the government. This was already in the statute from 2005. So we've been coordinating for the last 20 years across all the agencies, but this really elevates it. And the key is 3 specific working groups, supply and demand. So how do we really ensure we have so much investment in production, electrolysis, tax credits, and we really need to ensure there's no stranded assets and really make sure there's offtake, sustained offtake, competitive, creditworthy offtake. And so supply and demand at scale, infrastructure, siting, permitting, that's the second working group, and then just analysis, global competitiveness, the global supply chain we've all seen through COVID, and we've had great discussions with our German counterparts as well. How do we ensure a robust supply chain? And then we have within DOE, again, many offices, lots of coordination across the entire value chain, including workforce, equity, and justice. And so basically, as one example of the cross-agency collaboration is the long-awaited 45V guidance. I won't be able to talk about it because it is open now for public comment, the notice of proposed rulemaking, but I did want to highlight this and remind everyone that the deadline is February 26th for those who are interested in providing comments. And then within DOE, I thought I would just highlight a couple of other examples of documents that might be of interest. Our program plan, again, it's all about really extreme collaboration, just even this whole conference is about collaboration. And so across the value chain, we're going from basic science all the way to deployments. We have a loan program office. And this is, I know, a complicated slide, but just gives you an example of all the things that we're doing to really bring all the resources to bear here. So we have centers of excellence or consortia focusing on the R&D. So we provide funding to universities, industries, labs. We use kind of core capabilities, first of a kind demonstrations to de-risk. For example, we have the nation's first nuclear to hydrogen project with electrolysis behind the meter we're funding, several renewables, steel project, even refueling the passenger ferry data center with Microsoft. We have 15 trucks operating in a disadvantaged community with UPS, actually doubles the range compared to batteries. So lots of examples of de-risking. And then, of course, on the deployment side, we also have our loan program office and already a couple of existing projects. Again, financing in addition to grants is critical, and then lots of enabling activities. How many of you have heard of the Center for Hydrogen Safety? Okay, not too many, but there too, that's a huge priority. So safety incidents, we have over 100 partners, a lot of German companies, international companies as well. That's open for universities as well to join. So again, lots and lots of resources available. And then I wanted to end with just the importance of collaboration, the EJ component, diversity, equity, inclusion, safety codes, that whole space. And I often use this quote that no one person can whistle a symphony, takes a whole orchestra. And so we really need at this point, all the stakeholders, government, industry, academia, investors, the global community, disadvantaged tribal communities. And so this just gives you a snapshot. We have lots of international activities, so multilaterals. If you look at IPHE.net, which was launched over 20 years ago, specifically government collaboration on hydrogen, and we've actually had U.S. and Germany as vice chairs for some time. And then the breakthrough agenda, where we're mapping out all the different international activities, what are the priorities, certification, enabling trade. Those are some examples of the priorities. And so we also launched H2DIA, so diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility. So feel free to take a look at COP. So again, really highlighting the importance of DEIA. And then finally, 2 more things I thought I'd mention. This is still evolving, but we'd love to get feedback on how do we really engage with the disadvantaged and EJ communities. We're having listening sessions. Again, we have to show benefit to all communities. And then since this was a student oriented event, I wanted to emphasize the early career network. Are there any students or postdocs here? Okay, no, maybe online. Okay, so anyway, feel free to take a look. There's over 500 members now, almost 40 countries. So it's really an opportunity to network and help to develop the next generation of leaders in policy, research, business across the board for hydrogen and fuel cells. So we have lots and lots of resources available. For the geeks in us, 1.008 is the atomic weight of hydrogen. So save your calendar for October 8th. 10/8 is National Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Day, thanks to our trade association. And Congress actually passes a resolution. So making it a national, I think it's the only, other than Pi Day, but the only element that has its own atomic weight day. So a way to get information out. Again, one of the challenges is actually lack of awareness for hydrogen. So lots of resources available. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Satchapal. Given that we started a few minutes late, we will not have time for Q&A for our keynote speaker today, but I believe she will be around for the rest of the event. I'm not saying go and bring all your questions to her, but just saying. We are now going to get ready for our first panel, which is U.S. and German policy and hydrogen cooperation, moderated by Samantha Gross from the Brookings Institution. So I will get her set up here on the stage, and then we will switch to that for everyone. Please, a little bit of patience with all of our panels today, as we have hybrid formats. So this panel, we have 4 panelists who are remote with an in-person moderator. Our second panel, we will have a remote moderator with 4 in-person panelists. So welcome to our collaboration.
Good morning. Good morning to everyone here in Washington. Good morning or good afternoon, as the case may be, to our folks who are joining us online. As Chris said, I'm Samantha Gross. I'm the director of the Energy Security and Climate Initiative and a fellow in foreign policy at the Brookings Institution. And I have the pleasure of chairing our first panel today. We don't have a lot of time and we have 4 very good panelists. And so you didn't come to listen to me talk. I'm going to go straight into the introductions. Christine, would you like to introduce yourself briefly to start?
Hi there. Thank you for having me. I'm Christine Falkengrosser. I'm a director at the German Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action, as we call it here. I'm basically the German Sonita. I'm working on hydrogen. I'm coordinating hydrogen in the German government. We have lots of, as in the United States, lots of ministries working on hydrogen. And this is my field of expertise. I've been with the ministry for 15 years and I'm an economist by profession.
Thank you. Justina. I think you're muted. I'm sorry. It had to happen sometime.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Oh, we just lost you.
Oh, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks for your patience. And Justina Gallegos here from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, where we are working with colleagues, including our esteemed panelists who opened up from the Department of Energy and across the USG to implement the President's industrial policy across the bipartisan infrastructure law, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS and Science Act, which is really stimulating and creating place-based ecosystems that support high-quality jobs and bolstering national security, and really putting the U.S. on a path to net zero. And hydrogen is a key part of that. So really looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Alexi.
Hello, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here. My name is Alexi. I'm a senior principal on RMI Climate Aligned Industry team, leading our hydrogen work, where we have 30 people involved. And to mention a few initiatives that will be probably relevant for this discussion, We spend a lot of time on demand creation. We just heard from Sunita that the cost of hydrogen to consumers is probably the most important topic to tackle, but it's not only cost in our view. So we do believe that, you know, the fully decarbonized product cannot cost and, you know, be priced the same as, you know, not a decarbonized product. Therefore, we spend a lot of time on creating differentiated markets for hydrogen and, you know, platforms such as buyers alliances and book and claim systems, etc. Second initiative that we have is the Transatlantic Clean Hydrogen Trade Coalition that we have launched last year, where a number of German companies are actually involved, but we have over 20 companies across on both sides of the Atlantic and try to enable the clean hydrogen trade between the U.S. Gulf Coast and Northwest Europe, of course, with Germany being the biggest market in the Northwest Europe. And finally, we've also been involved into work of you know, other initiatives such as a Green Hydrogen Task Force, for example, that a number of German companies have been involved into with Australian companies looking at export-import of hydrogen between Australia and Germany. So pleasure to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Susanna.
Good morning and good evening. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Susana Moreira. I am Executive Director at H2 Global Foundation. Amongst many things, I'm responsible for outreach as well as research. But I believe that you will be asking me some more questions about what H2 Global is and what we do. So I will let a bit of the description for that a bit later on. But thank you again for having me.
Yeah, and a big thanks to all our panelists for joining us remotely. I'm a little lonely here on this stage, but so far this is working pretty well. I have a couple of questions, a couple of lines of questioning. One of them is to talk a bit about the proposed 45V tax credits and how clean green hydrogen is defined. As Sunita pointed out in her keynote, the comment period for those is open. They're proposed right now. And so now is an excellent time to talk about them, to think them over, to understand what they mean, both environmentally and from a trade perspective. So it's a good time to talk about this. So we're going to talk about those a bit, and then we're going to move on to some trade issues, more broadly and specifically between the US and Germany. So Christine, I'd like to start with you. We all know, I'm preaching to the choir, that Germany is the industrial heart of Europe. And hydrogen is essential to decarbonizing Germany's industrial sector. Are the proposed standards and the policies that we are enacting here in the United States, facilitating the potential partnership between the US and Germany? Do our definitions of clean and green mesh with how Germany is approaching it?
I wish I could just say yes or no to these questions and then leave it to that, but it's a bit more complex than this, of course it is. Above all, I think the most important issue to always consider is this is all a big, big learning game for all of us. You know, this is a market, it's not existent. We have so many things that we don't know about volumes, about prices, but also about technology, and there's much to discover, and hopefully there's much to discover because we are dependent on new technologies emerging and also the value chain being created. So as Sunita pointed also out in her presentation, so we are working on the policy level with a lot of variables at the moment. We are defining corridors, we are talking about scenarios. On these scenarios, we are dependent and we are structuring new ideas, new instruments, new support instruments also to go beyond. So part of this is also the question of regulatory frameworks, that's standards, that's certification, that's as simple as the definition of what is green, right? What is sustainable in the long run? And we have different approaches to this internationally, and I think that's a good thing. It's part of competition. It's part of finding different solutions to the same challenge, and then hoping to find one that is long-lasting. So I feel this is a good idea to discuss this. What is very important in this context is to make sure that we always consider the international trade in this context. And we will come to this a bit more in depth, talking about multilateralism, the question of international cooperation, also on the question of standardization. But just to say, in Germany, we are really, as you are in the United States, I'm aware, really thinking much more along value chains than we used to. In former times, a few years ago, every department was very happy to really develop their own instruments and just push the market here, push the market there, and just hope that everything falls in place at some point. But right now, due to the pressure that we have, considering 45 climate neutrality, CO2 neutrality until then, and also the Paris goals, we really have to push much harder than we ever had before. And we have to make sure that everything really falls into place. And just one example I always love to give is the question of export coming from other countries. Germany, as you all know, we are an importer of hydrogen derivatives as well. Just to distinguish, it's very important. But then really to think about what volumes will come in. What kind of trade regulation do we need? What kind of standards need to be in place? The certifiers, they need to be ready to actually certify. We need to have the cost of difference covered. We need to think about the terminals. We need to think about the regulation in the ports. We need to think about the demand side. We need to think about the infrastructure, and everything has to be ready at exactly the same time. So that's a real challenge. And I see the interagency approach that we have in the United States. We have something very similar here in Germany in my team. And I'm very glad that we came to this point to really think much more along the value chain and to work with all partners together to steer these wheels.
Yeah, the value chain on this is so important because we're in a hurry. It would be great to see this all develop organically and just sort of let the market take care of everything. But when we're looking at the climate goals that we have and where we want to get quickly, then you have the need to goose supply and demand at the same time and make sure the infrastructure is ready. And it's a whole nother set of questions. Justina, I'd like to turn to you next on the US side. Industry groups are concerned about the new 45V definitions of green, especially the requirement for hourly matching by 2028, the requirement that green power be matched on an hourly basis as it feeds into hydrogen electrolyzers. What innovations can make this hourly matching of green hydrogen economic? And how can we support producers in meeting this goal and actually producing green hydrogen in the way we want to see it?
Thanks, Samantha. Matching the generation to electricity use is critically important in appropriately measuring life cycle GHG emissions, which is why the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, also called an NPRM in government speak, proposes an hourly matching requirement once the capability for hourly matching is in place. And so the Department of Energy released a technical paper explaining the importance of temporal matching between generation and electricity use. In general, energy attribute certificates, also known as EACs, will need to be matched to production on an hourly basis. Without this requirement, hydrogen facilities could use generation with higher GHG emissions at certain times of the day. But the NPRM introduces a transaction rule that will allow annual matching, as you mentioned, until 2028. This phase-in is necessary to allow more time for hourly tracking systems and contractual mechanisms to really become more widely available. And once those tracking software infrastructure is in place nationally, it may take additional time for transactional structures and efficient hourly EAC markets to develop. And among the issues that require resolution as EAC tracking systems move towards hourly resolution is really the treatment of electricity storage. And so in addition to providing a historic subsidy for clean hydrogen production while implementing environmental safeguards that are clearly rooted in the Clean Air Act, the Treasury's framework will support domestic manufacturing with more flexible electrolyzers that are best suited for hourly matching, instead of supporting further import of lower cost, less fit for purpose Chinese electrolyzers. And so the NPRM proposes to begin hourly matching again in 2028, but requests comment on what an appropriate phase-in would be. And so based on the consultation with stakeholders and coordination with experts across Treasury and the Department of Energy, we believe 2028 is a reasonable date. However, the NPRM is also taking comment on this question. The NPRM follows more than a year of extensive consultation with external stakeholders coordinated by government experts across the Treasury Department, the Department of Energy, and the EPA. And we believe the approach taken by the NPRM will strive and to take the right balance to enable industry to develop with very strong standards. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for the answer. And I'd like to turn to Alexi to sort of dig into this a little deeper. What we're hearing is that there are trade-offs in getting the hydrogen industry going quickly. On the one hand, we want to get this new fuel going. We want investments to happen. We want to get moving. But on the other hand, we want to make sure that green hydrogen is really green. And that's what Justina is talking about with respect to hourly matching. We want to make sure, because hydrogen production is very energy intensive, that we're actually using green energy to the extent that we can, and that the numbers we're calculating are real for the greenhouse gas impacts of hydrogen. Alexi, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this trade-off. The administration needed to find balance in its draft 45B requirements. How did they do? And in particular, something that hasn't come up yet is the role of carbon capture and storage and use with respect to hydrogen production. So I'd love to hear some thoughts on that if you can.
Yeah, thank you. This is an excellent question, Samantha, and you went to the very heart of it. So, I mean, in terms of what trade-off or what balance did the administration have to strike here while developing 45V guidance. And I don't want to get into details of the three-pillar approach that, as Justina pointed out, has been debated for more than a year in great details. And I think we could spend probably the whole of our time just discussing those three pillars and those nuances, such as hourly matching versus annual matching that Justina has already covered. I think so. I'll stay a little bit high level here, and we'll describe how we feel about this approach the administration took. And as you've pointed out, I mean, the trick here was to strike the balance between the scale up or pace of the scale up of the industry and ensuring that essentially we start achieving the emission reduction goals from the very start of scaling up of the industry and demonstrate concrete climate and environmental more broadly benefits of clean hydrogen. And we believe that the administration did an excellent job there. I mean, in finding the right balance. That's not only RMI belief, this is the belief of many other organizations coming from a civil society angle to this, but also we saw many industry players coming out in a strong support of this three-pillar regulation. And I think, look, the reason why we believe it's the right balance, because it does provide a lot of flexibility to project developers. First of all, we have the phase-in approach, which you've mentioned, where the switch from hourly matching to annual, from annual matching to hourly matching will occur on January 1st, 2028. We've got also energy attributes certificates that will provide more flexibility again for project developers, as they will be trying to maximize the utilization of their electrolyzers. Finally, I think the 5% rule, which is put out there for consultation on the existing clean power use, which allows some nuclear and hydro that has been built before to be also used. all of this mechanisms provide a great degree of flexibility for the project developers to develop and launch their projects. The second point that I would like to make, which I've kind of already implicitly made, is that, yes, I mean, the industry might not be fully aligned right now in its views on how stringent the guidance should be, and we will see still some debate ongoing as a consultation window is open on this. But I would say this is normal to expect from industry, a push for more flexible rules. At the same time, I think the key question that we should ask ourselves is, what do we really see in terms of developments in the market? And RMI is an NGO that spends traditionally a lot of time working on the market-based mechanism, and therefore working and spending a lot of time working with industry. And what we see in the industry, or happening in the industry, is that we see the expanding pool of projects that are on a pretty aggressive timeline, particularly on the Gulf Coast, but also in the other regions that have been, in the process of development for, a good, couple or 3 years, and, now gearing towards, feed final engineering design and, final investment decision stage. So I think we will see many final investment decisions being made on once the guidance is finalized and the rules of the game are clear already this year. And to the high degree, this alignment and harmonized approach that U.S. has taken with 45E guidance, which is very much aligned and harmonized with the approach that Europe has taken under the Renewable Energy Directive delegated acts, will also play greatly in favor of international trade of hydrogen and collaboration between U.S. and Europe at large. I'm already, teeing it up for the next topic of discussion.
Thanks. Yeah, and I just want to point out in this talk of getting hydrogen production going, the highest level of subsidy under the Inflation Reduction Act and the 45V guidance is $3 a kilogram at the very lowest level of greenhouse gas emissions. That's real money. And so how these standards are put together, how you qualify for that very highest subsidy and very lowest level of greenhouse gas emissions is incredibly important, because the subsidies are quite rich, and there could be a lot of investment brought about by these subsidies. Susanna, I want to come to you. You sit in a different place than our other panelists, and I mean that in a very good way, with H2 Global's goal of promoting the production and use of green hydrogen. Can you explain who H2 Global is and how you do this?
Yes, of course. So thanks again for the opportunity. So H2 Global was established in 2021. We are a nonprofit foundation. We are based in Hamburg. And as you said, our main objective is to promote the protection of the climate and trying to support the emergence of markets for low carbon products globally using market-based instruments. In addition to these market-based instruments, which I will talk very briefly about, we also conduct research looking at barriers for clean hydrogen market ramp-up, and we conduct outreach to various stakeholders in the hydrogen space. We have 65 donors, and they basically are representing the world, and they're covering the whole of the hydrogen value chain. So H2 Global is sort of claim to fame is that we helped develop a mechanism. It's called the H2 Global mechanism, which tries to promote the emergence, in this case, of the hydrogen market. So right now, what we observed, and I think Dr. Satyapal also mentioned, is that there isn't really yet a market for clean hydrogen. There isn't a lot of liquidity. There's very few deals that are happening. There is not a real market price. In terms of standards, we have just had this long exchange of the differences and all that is still being discussed, and they're not really globally applied. And we also have a lot of barriers of entry to the market. So H2 Global's mechanism is trying to address some of these issues, and it's structured in the following way. It's a double auction mechanism, which means that we are conducting an auction both on the side of the producing side, so the ones that are producing the hydrogen, and we are doing another auction for those that want to acquire it, so on the demand side. And that work or those contracts are entered by a new entity which is created. It's called HINCO. It's an intermediary which enters the contracts with both the suppliers and the buyers of hydrogen. HINCO is 100% owned by the foundation, and it does so they're responsible for organizing the auctions, but they're also responsible to, in the process, to try to identify the prices that we are able to get from both the suppliers and the demand side. As it is expected, and again was mentioned on many occasions, there is going to be a difference between the price that we are able to get as buyers of the hydrogen and what the suppliers can produce. So we expect it to be a difference, and that difference has to be paid through, in this case, a compensation for this difference, and that is also then financed through the entities that are willing to finance. At this case, so far it has been primarily governments, primarily the German government, and Dr. Falkengrosser here has played an important role in that as an early supporter of the H2 Global I guess team and mechanism as well. So thanks to that support, H2 Global launched first auction for 900 million euros. That auction is currently ongoing. I can tell you a little bit more about that later. But in addition, the German authorities have earmarked, I emphasize the words earmarked, 3.53 billion euros for additional auctions. And we also had at end of last year, 300 million euros also earmarked by the Netherlands. We have been receiving a lot of interest from various governments in this approach, because as a result of the way it's structured, it's considered to be a quite flexible and efficient mechanism that will hopefully help reduce the compensation of the difference between the price and help, let's say, accelerate the creation of the market by sort of forcing the market to come together in this artificial way through these auctions. So I think that's it for me for now, and I'm happy to provide more information later.
Thank you so much. It's very interesting, and starting to think about, this is all a lot of hand waving until we have a real market with buyers and sellers. And it's fascinating to see that market get going. I'd like to go through a second round of questioning and focus really on trade. That's kind of what we're all here to talk about between the US and Germany. And Christine, I'd like to come back to you. I'd like to talk a bit about the US and the EU and Germany tend to take different regulatory approaches. But if we're going to trade on hydrogen, it's going to be really important that we agree on some of our definitions, our certification schemes, that we work through multilateral organizations to facilitate trade in truly green hydrogen. What mechanisms are in place for the US and the EU and Germany to cooperate and facilitate this agreement on standards so that we can facilitate trade?
I think it's a very, very central question that you bring up here, the interoperability between the markets and also between the standards and the certification schemes. In the perfect world, we would have one scheme, we would be all harmonized and everybody would be happy because everything is easily recognized by the other party. But we come from different standpoints. We have different energy backgrounds, not only across the Atlantic, but also already within Europe. And Aleski already pointed it out a little bit. There's a lot of different cultural and also geographical background that we have. So we have to accept that also to take on board the population that we have, our voters that we have to consider as well. we have to make sure that we have standards and approaches that are good for everyone in the country, but then also for the interoperability. So the challenge here is, if we have so many different regional approaches and so many different regional systems, to really make sure that still trade can happen, and the costs of transaction are not so high that we cannot make it work simply by not making it economical to go through all the effort to get people to work with the different system. So what we did at COP28 last year in November was we followed up together with our friends from Namibia and Japan into an initiative with the Hydrogen Council that we call the Mutual Recognition of Certification Schemes, which should do exactly this. So it's coming out of an initiative that we launched when we were G7 presidency already a year before. So this takes a lot of time to bring this about. And the general idea is to make sure that our governments on a very high-ranking level accept that we have to talk to each other to mutually recognize the approaches that we have, methodological approaches, but also in the certification processes, which does not mean that we work with that we acknowledge different thresholds, because this is something that our politically is very difficult to sell within the country. So we will keep our thresholds, we will keep our standards, which are, as Oleski pointed out, luckily not so far apart from each other in our case. But we want to be sure that we enable trade by making mutually recognized standards clear. Predictability is key in investment decisions. So it's not so much about it has to be harmonized or it has to be low or high or whatever, but it has to be clear. And it has to be clear as early as possible to get this final investment decisions as soon as possible. And as Susanna pointed out, we also need to cover the cost of difference, but this is a different matter then again. So this is the initiative that we have, and you asked for the platforms just to follow this up. So this was an initiative coming out of a G7 initiative. It was launched at COP. More than 40 countries signed this declaration. Happy to talk about all the important importers and exporters, potential importers and exporters, I should say. So we have them all on board now, and we want to follow up in the SEM context that's the Clean Energy Ministerial context or multilateral format, to really work out the details on what exactly can we do. And the question is a little bit, do we do that multilaterally, plurilaterally, or bilaterally? And the answer is all of it. So we have to follow up multilaterally. We want to bring this up again at COP. We want to talk in triangular formulas, plurilaterally, as many regional cooperations as we can do. But we also need this bilateral contact that we have here in this forum, but then also with the energy partnership, energy and climate partnership between the United States and Germany, to really bring this topic forward. It's very technical topics, but it's very important and essential to get trade going.
Time in my work explaining Americans to Europeans and vice versa. I spent significant time in Europe, especially in Germany. And so there's a lot of this. Some of our underlying approaches to the climate crisis are different, but we have to find ways to bring our approaches together enough to facilitate trade. And that's where things get really interesting. Our fundamental approaches probably aren't going to change. We can meet in the middle to trade if we really think about it. So that's really important on this issue. Justina, back to you. Can you explain how the U.S. hydrogen program intends to facilitate equitable access to hydrogen, both in the U.S. and abroad? Sunita's proposal, or Sunita's discussion talked a lot about that, and I'd love to hear how you're approaching that.
Sure, thanks, Samantha. I love this question, so thank you for it. Equitable access to innovations is really at the heart of the President's Investing in America agenda, and you can see it throughout Bill Chip's and IRA and implementation there. And so our goal here is a robust hydrogen sector that supports good-paying jobs, in addition to delivering on the President's and world's climate imperatives. And so we believe America's hydrogen industry will be stronger over the medium term in particular, and better positioned for global leadership if it is grounded in high standards for clean hydrogen production. And through more than a year of extensive stakeholder consultations, many clean hydrogen producers have already indicated but they're developing projects fully compatible with the Treasury Department's framework, and that these projects will be profitable and compliant with the current proposed guidelines. We've already seen billions of dollars in private sector investment that has already been announced in green hydrogen projects that align fully with Treasury's framework. And these producers recognize that America's hydrogen industry will be stronger and better positioned to lead the global market if it adheres to the highest standards for clean hydrogen production. And as we know, clean hydrogen projects are already advancing in other countries with broadly similar approaches, but smaller direct financial incentives for hydrogen production. And the stand-up of clean hydrogen industry in the U.S. and the EU are occurring in very different contexts, with very different sector policies, renewable energy supply potential, and as mentioned, statutory and legal frameworks. And we believe the U.S. rules are broadly similar to the EU rules on a conceptual level, and that the U.S. projects will move forward just as we've seen projects in the EU move forward under EU-based rules. And we will, of course, continue to engage with our European counterparts as U.S. clean hydrogen sector continues to develop further with an eye towards achieving our shared climate, economic, and security goals. So really, thank you for that question.
Oh, absolutely. Alexi, I'd like to sort of continue that line of questioning with you. We understand that international trade in clean hydrogen is likely to be really important. Do you see additional policies or agreements that we need to facilitate trade, especially between the U.S. and Germany?
The short answer is yes. And then there are different aspects, of course. I think Christina has covered in a great detail the topic of certification harmonization, which is super important, and there is work to do there, but I'm personally very hopeful. Yes, very technical issue, but we've got international partnership for hydrogen economy, which is essentially government to government platform, where Christina, Sunita, and all the others are, very much involved into, figuring this out. And there was some real progress that has been made. So I'm very positive on this topic, albeit it does take time and it's not a simple topic. Then there is a question of infrastructure, of course, that Christina also touched upon. Again, that's not an easy topic because there is a lot of coordination that is needed on the both sides of the Atlantic. If you talk about the U.S. German trade, and that's exactly why we have established the Transatlantic Clean Hydrogen Trade Coalition, or one of the reasons, to ensure that coordination, because it's not only, the American companies that would like to understand, better the answer to the question that Henry Kissinger, rest in peace, asked a long time ago, in a political domain, whom should I call if I call Europe? It's also the same question that is being asked on the European side. Whom should we call if you want to ensure the coordination happening of the infrastructure developments happening on the US side, right? So that's not simple, but again, that's happening with the private actors being involved, with the governments being involved. So I'm positive on that too. I think where really I would like to focus the attention, in this discussion is the topic really of the demand creation and, being even more specific, the sense of urgency around that, right? And that topic also touches a little bit on, on the topic of a meta-narrative that we have, between the governments, Europe, US. I really like what Christina has said, right? Is like, as clear as possible, as soon as possible, right? We need that clarity. And look, if you would look, at the picture right now from the industry perspective, the clarity is not quite there, even at the level of this, high-level political signals, and the political risks are not insignificant. We have the elections upcoming in the US. We have the elections upcoming in Europe in June, right? So the sooner we can, we bring as much clarity as possible, the better it would be for the industry to act and move the projects forward. I'll give a couple of examples, also teeing it up a little bit for Susanna. Susanna has mentioned 900 million euros that has been allocated to H2 Global and ongoing auctions. Well, if you do the quick math, you know, that should enable like maybe 100,000 to 200,000 tons of hydrogen import, depending on what the difference would be, right? And then there is another 3.5 billion plus 300 million from Netherlands. I mean, 3.5 billion earmarked from Germany and 300 million earmarked from the Netherlands. Well, I think the question there is how we can move this, you know, billions from the category of earmarked to the category of in execution, because, you know, these auctions, they do take time, right? And it's a lengthy process for all the objective reasons. At the same time, our analysis shows that, you know, to reach the goals that Europe has set up for itself to import 10 million tons of green hydrogen by 2030, there will be a need of 15 billion to 20 billion of public support, right? So we are talking a little bit about, you know, different order of magnitude, and we are already in 2024, and I would argue that 2030 is right around the corner from that perspective. So that's like point number one. Point number two, I think we do need to have a greater clarity on this win-win situation when it comes to transatlantic hydrogen trade. I mean, point number one, I mean, there are countries in Europe, and as Christina has pointed out, Germany is one of them. I think Belgium and Netherlands are probably the other two, which are very obvious, that will need import of hydrogen even beyond 2030 timeline, right? So the sooner we can start these mechanisms, the better. And, you know, the narrative around urgency, I mean, it's probably there in Germany, maybe in Netherlands, but like if you look holistically and, you know, go and have some round tables in Brussels, you don't quite get there because I think, you know, once you bring the industry and the timelines of some real projects that are happening on the ground into the perspective, it becomes very clear that if you want to meet this 2030 timeline, the investment decisions have to be made by industrial players in the next, you know, couple of years. Third point is that we don't speak, you know, enough about what this 15 to 20 billion would unlock. And what they're going to unlock is, again, according to RMI analysis, is 300 billion in private spendings on renewable energy system, electrolyzers, new infrastructures on the both sides of the Atlantic or in Europe and exporting countries, because US wouldn't be the only country, of course, that aims to export green hydrogen to Europe. I think we need to talk more about it on both sides of the Atlantic. For example, European electrolyzer industry is probably one of the strongest industry in the world. I mean, if you would look at the top 20 electrolyzer OEMs, manufacturers, half of them will be European. Companies like ThyssenKrupp and Siemens, they're already here in the US markets, and other European companies. They will benefit from this scale up. Same with energy players. Again, I've mentioned already, in that coalition that we've created of 20 companies, we have several German companies that are developing projects in the US, and a number of European companies, like more generally. So I think we need to talk more about this meta narrative in a much more aligned way, and some of that work can be done, of course, by industry, but I think there is a great, you know, imperative here to have strong voices coming from the governments on the both sides of the Atlantic.
Yeah, I want to drive home a couple of things that I heard in your answer. One of them is the incredible importance of policy certainty. We're talking about making very large, very long-lived investments. I hate to talk about elections, but we need to think really hard about the importance of certainty in making these investments, because policy is so important in getting supply and demand to grow together and inducing this new industry. So just a thought about how important that is. And then the second is, I've heard the word infrastructure a lot, and the engineer in me feels a strong need to say this because I haven't heard it yet this morning. Hydrogen is a pesky little molecule. You can't just drop hydrogen into the natural gas distribution system and think it's going to work. You need different metallurgy. Hydrogen is more difficult to handle. And so when we talk about infrastructure, this is a real thing because you need a different metallurgy and some different infrastructure to handle hydrogen. So just want to plant that point. Susanna, I'd like to come back to you. And again, I love the practicality of what you're doing. Can you talk a little bit about what you're seeing in this first auction? I'd especially be interested if you can tell us sort of the difference between the price offered for sale and the price offered to buy, how that compares somewhat to the U.S. subsidies. Like, how is this auction working out?
Well, I have to disappoint you here a little bit because the negotiations are literally ongoing for the first side of this double auction, which is on the purchase side. So currently we have negotiations with a few bidders that have submitted their interest in participating. I wanted to use the opportunity to just explain the 900 million is not for hydrogen direct purchase, but actually for derivatives. So it's 300 million for ammonia, 300 million for methanol, and 300 million for eSAF. These are the three derivatives that were selected by the German authorities as being what they would like to target for this particular auction. I think one of the issues or that led them to opt for derivatives was precisely the issue of infrastructure and how are these things going to be transported and stored and all of these things. And so right now, I don't have a price. The price hasn't been yet identified, but we are hoping to get some results in the spring. And that would be for the contracts on the purchase side, which are 10-year long contracts, which will help with some certainty and hopefully get some of these projects to FID, which I think is really the objective that we want to pursue. On the other side, the auction on the purchase side, those have not yet started, but those contracts are 1 year long instead of 10 years. And the idea is that with time, the price that buyers are willing to pay is going to go up in virtue of changes in legislation, increasing cost of carbon, etc., which will drive the price to go up. And that will mean that over that 10-year period, the difference in between the two prices will get smaller. I mean, that's at least the idea that we have there. I would like to use the opportunity to say that infrastructure is really key. It's one of the things that has emerged in some of the discussions that we've had. And that's actually the focus of one of the working groups that we have in the research department from the foundation, which is looking at how we can help finance some of this infrastructure. Because the speed is really key. As Oleksiy was saying, a lot of these decisions have to be made in a very short term if we are able to get the scale of production that is required. And so that's one of the topics that we are looking at, how we can bring some innovation into this area. And I wanted to just tell you as well, it's not just the infrastructure that you would think about, let's say the pipelines or the terminals or the storage, but it's also we have to think about the ancillary infrastructure. So in some of these projects, in some of these countries that have the highest potential, lowest cost for hydrogen, they don't have the roads to bring, the wind turbines and all of these things. So there's a broader question as well in terms of infrastructure. If you start thinking, particularly in the context of developing countries, there's a lot of considerations that need to be taken in consideration. So I think that's it. I think unfortunately, hopefully, if we speak again in the spring, I'll have some good news for you on the auction.
That's great. Thank you so much. And thanks for clarifying some of the infrastructure needs. That's really helpful. And we move to some of these hydrogen carrier projects like sustainable aviation fuel or methanol, because hydrogen is so difficult to move around in such a pesky little molecule. So I'd just like to thank you all for your kind attention. I thank my panelists for joining us from all the different places in the world that they are. And I think right now I'm the only thing that stands between you and a coffee break. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So I'd like to introduce our moderator who is remote. So again, if there are any technical hiccups, everybody, please, a little patience. Gabriel Toomey, the CEO and president of Responsible Alpha.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you enjoyed your coffee. I wish I was there. I'm supposed to be there. And then, of course, as you know, the polar vortex occurs like clockwork now, as we understand, because of climate risk. So briefly, I'm the CEO of Responsible Alpha, and my background in energy and in ESG and sustainability goes back to 2000, when I was working at Wells Fargo in correspondent banking. I worked on the trading floor, and also I traded Fed funds and worked and did credit analysis for about 2,000 client banks. And then in 2006, I then pivoted to green finance and climate finance, working with various clients, including Morgan Stanley and USAID. I was then a sector analyst covering for 41 mutual funds, fixed income and equity funds at Calvert Investments. My coverage universe included petrochemicals, energy, utilities, natural capital, banks, insurers, and exchanges. I sat on the Calvert Global Energy Solutions Fund and the Green Bond Fund. I'm formerly the head of plastics for Planet Tracker, and I live here in Österreich in Vienna, and just south of Germany, of course. And I'm sorry I cannot be there today. So let's talk about the next steps in this fascinating space. So with this, I'd like to turn it over that you have each panelist introduce themselves. And Martin, could we start with you, please?
Absolutely. So hope I'm audible. First of all, thanks a lot here for the organization and for the possibility to speak, because I think we're all brothers and sisters in crime. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but we need these rounds here to make what counts really effectively in the future also working, which is hydrogen and a green future. So I'm very, very pleased and very honored also coming from Germany last week on the CES, being invited here by the team and then being here with my co-panelists speaking here. My name is Martin Lischka. I'm leading the strategy and the marketing department of Quantron. Quantron is a hydrogen, but also a battery electric player when it comes to commercial vehicles, but also ecosystem. So we are creating something that is both hydrogen-powered trucks and buses for future generations to have a little bit less CO2, but also we are doing the battery electric world because I think it is both that counts. From my background, I'm engineer, so I know I think also what is called efficiency levels, that everything is needed for having a green transportation, making work. But it is not only that, you need to convince, you need to collaborate with with engineers, with like-minded people, but also with the whole topic of being not only innovative, but inspiring for a greener future. And background also, I was at Audi before, so launching the Audi e-tron, so I know both the electric world, but also there is a very, very dedicated number of vehicles we'll be seeing in the future, not only fully electric, but also hydrogen powered. And honored to be here and really looking forward for the discussion here with everyone.
Well, thank you. RB, could you introduce yourself, please?
Good. So thank you, Gabriel. It's again, it's my pleasure to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for the invitation. So my name is RB Balaji. I'm Chief Industry Advisor for Global Manufacturing at the International Finance Corporation, which is not far from here. We are the private sector investment arm of the World Bank Group, and our mandate is to invest in emerging markets. So, we don't really invest in projects in the US or in Germany, but of course, what markets do sets an example and on the pathway for the rest of the world that often is followed. Climate action is one of the major drivers for our investments these days. You all probably know that the World Bank, recently updated its mission to include, livable planet as part of the core mission that we need to deliver. And decarbonizing heavy industries is a critical driver for our work. And hydrogen is an essential part of that work. So we are engaged in over a dozen different projects at various levels around the world. And I'm looking forward to sharing our experience and knowledge, on this panel and with you all.
Wonderful. Kendall, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, happy to. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for making it out on a cold and snowy morning. So Kendall Stevenson with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is a trade association, the U.S.'s largest, that advocates on behalf of all of business. So specifically within the chamber, I work in the Global Energy Institute, working on the implementation of IRA and IIJA, and also some international climate and energy issues, obviously specifically hydrogen, and leading our work on 45V. So excited to be part of this conversation. And I think you're right when you say brothers and sisters in crime on this issue, and happy to provide a new perspective, different perspective on the issues today.
Completely agree with that. You're certainly brother and sisters in crime here. Brian, over to you.
Great, thank you, and thank you all for being here. It's a great opportunity. I think I've heard the word collaboration a few times and partners in crime. I think that's why we're here, right? I mean, we have universities, we have government, we have think tanks in the room, and I think we can't do this alone. We all have to work together to figure this out and to move this forward. So I'm Brian Raymond. I'm from a company called Siemens Energy. If you don't know Siemens Energy, we actually we're a brand new company. We split off from Siemens about 3 years ago. We have 90,000 people around the world, about 12,000 here in the US. And when we talk about the value chain, we like to say that Siemens Energy covers the entire value chain. So not only do we make electrolyzers, we also make gas turbines that can burn hydrogen. We make wind turbines that if you hook them up to an electrolyzer, you can of course make green hydrogen. And of course, we're very, very big in the transmission space. I think something that isn't talked about enough when it comes to solving this, this energy crisis. So when it comes to hydrogen, it's obviously climate change. That's one of our big responsibilities. We feel as a company leading the energy transition. We can't do it without hydrogen. It's going to take a while, but I think we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I'm really happy to be here. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Brian. So the first question goes to you, and I would also like to ask if Kendall could jump in on this too. We see different markets in the United States and Germany, and both have different, one could say, ramp up schedules, if you would, for hydrogen. Here in the United States, we have cheap natural gas, of course, but we yet do not have a carbon price. On the other hand, in Germany, you have the opposite. You have a carbon price, but natural gas is not quite as inexpensive as it is in the United States. What do you think are the challenges both markets are facing? And in the US, do you think hydrogen is solely reliant on tax incentives, or are there other initiatives or investor reasons to invest in the sector?
Thanks. I mean, when we look at the energy transition, we see it as an all of the above energy transition. So it's not just an either or, it's both. And it's going to take a while from a gas perspective to that's not going anywhere anytime soon. I think we saw from Sunita's slides, it's a very broad energy mix. Can we make that as clean as possible through things like carbon capture, et cetera? Yes, we need to do that. We're all in on hydrogen. However, as I mentioned, it covers across our entire portfolio. So we want to make sure that it continues to evolve. And as was mentioned earlier, hydrogen is not new. It's been around for decades. I think everyone in this room knows that. Is it dependent on the tax credits? I would say no. Did the tax credits make a huge difference? Absolutely. When we talk to our folks in the business, before the IRA came along, we make a large PEM electrolyzer. We had folks kind of poking around saying, hey, can I buy half of your stack? It really didn't want to go all in because they didn't know where it was going. Now with the IRA, with the passage of the IRA, we had folks lining up saying, can I get 100 of those electrolyzers? That was kind of the order of magnitude because they saw this as a tremendous catalyst for the market. And so it is making a difference. So is it dependent on tax credits? No, because the market is going in that direction. Obviously, investments like companies like ours we have made. But do the tax credits help? Absolutely.
Now, I'll jump in and say that the tax credit, like you said, is extremely lucrative. So I think companies are jumping at the opportunity to benefit from this credit. Like you said, the market is headed there, but the hydrogen is one of the only solutions for hard to abate sectors. So it only makes sense that hydrogen is the solution, and companies and governments are working towards hydrogen as a legitimate clean energy solution in the market.
Absolutely. Having covered plastics and petrochemicals in my asset management days, I certainly understand the hard debate sector issues. For both of you, do you think that with the electrolyzers either being built in the United States or now also being built in Germany, there's opportunity to expand trade between the two countries?
I'm happy to take that one. So this market, the U.S. market specifically, is a very important market for us. It's our single largest country market that we have, and we have a number of manufacturing facilities here already. So it's as I mentioned, very important for us. But we don't make electrolyzers here yet. Because of the demand, because of the IRA, because of other things that we talked about expanding our footprint in the U.S. Absolutely. We'd love to invest more here, and not only in that product line, but I think all products line, because of the tremendous growth that's happening over here. That being said, and I was said on the earlier panel, a lot of the electrolyzer manufacturing is in Europe, and that's actually, we just opened an electrolyzer manufacturing facility in Berlin to kind of significant fanfare. We opened it with a partner. Air Liquide is our partner in this, so it was important to have that partnership, that offtake agreement. So when it comes to trade, yes, trade is very important. That's the only place in the world we're making these machines right now. We need them, and they're going to service this market until we have a larger footprint here or elsewhere. So yes, trade is critically important to the success of our business, but I think all folks' business. And it kind of goes back to that collaboration piece. I think the coordination or the collaboration between the U.S. and the EU, Germany specifically, is critical if this transition is going to move forward.
Fascinating. So Kendall, from where you're sitting at a U.S. Business Trade Association, there are probably lots of different types of comments and categories of comments regarding the tight deadlines and stringent requirements for 45V and other components within the IRA, the new hydrogen economy. Which pillar do you think, do you see as potentially most endangering a fast ramp up, or roadblocks? And what would you like us in the audience to do, like in Q1 this quarter, to facilitate and remove some of those roadblocks?
Yes, that's a hot question. I think, this is a highly politicized issue, but the guidance as a whole, it puts unnecessary burden on a still very nascent hydrogen industry, as we heard from the previous panel. And really, in my opinion, the broader issue of emissions trade-off between power and industrial sectors gets lost in this three-pillar debate. Congress intended 45V to spur domestic production of hydrogen and really be able to provide affordable and abundant supplies of hydrogen within the US, but then, eventually there'll need to be global offtake agreements and be able to become competitive with countries like Germany, who are ahead of us in technology. So I think all of the pillars are significant in their own right, and each have implications on specific projects in specific regions of the country. But the one you probably all have heard most is additionality or incrementality, as it's mentioned in the proposed rulemaking. If you don't know what that is, it is the pillar that requires hydrogen facilities to source new renewable energy. So you can't just take renewable energy that's already going to the grid for hydrogen production, and it must be within 36 months or 3 years of your facility coming online. So that one you've probably seen the most in the media, and this really is an unworkable timeline, this 3 years. Plug Power study that was released last year estimates that with just the additionality pillar, it would make projects the economics of certain projects be less investable by 45%. So almost half with just one pillar. That is very significant, and we know that will lead to less hydrogen on the market and at higher prices. So it's really important that not be one of the barriers to production there. I'll also note that there's permitting challenges within the additionality requirement, right? So, building out this related infrastructure in these new facilities, it's very alarming, right? You're not going to be able to build all these new facilities and the transmission lines in the timeline that DOE and the administration want. So additionality is kind of a beast of its own, but I have to mention time matching as well. So like mentioned in the previous panel, 2028 is that deadline, but DOE cites in their white paper that was released, in addition to this proposed rulemaking, that the technology for time matching is still only really in pilot stages. So it's not, we're unsure if it will be able to be at scale, be able to be used commercially by 2028. So sorry, that's a long way really of me saying that without a flexible and balanced approach to all of the pillars, it's going to be hard to attract investment and increase supply of hydrogen.
Kendall, do you have an opinion, whether personally or professionally, on whether incrementality or additionality would be better served if it was 48 months or 60 months?
I think the most time possible, the most flexible approach for industry is best. You know, we want just a level playing field for hydrogen, right? And the way it stands, it's not that case. I'll let Brian jump in here.
Yeah, and I just, what you say kind of tracks well with what we've heard from our customers, right? I mean, that's who the folks that we talk to, our customers, and how is this going to impact projects? Of course, we want to make the electrolyzers and the other technologies that goes along with these projects. And, you know, it is, I don't want to say it's too early to tell, but there is a process here. We heard about the public comment process and the public hearing process, and the final rule doesn't come out yet. So I think having conversations like this, hearing from big groups like the Chamber about these perspectives is important for all of us to consider. We've heard, and the articles, you can, you know, do a Google search and kind of see industry reaction to these. And some folks say it'll increase cost 20 to 50% of projects. Will it delay projects as well? I think that's kind of the initial reaction from folks. I think people are still trying to digest it, and I think that'll come through in the comment process. So we're still gathering feedback from our customers, but you know, we don't want to do anything. We want, I mean, what the Biden administration has done and the DOE to encourage the acceleration of this market has been great. As I mentioned before, in terms of the interest from our customers, we don't want to do anything to slow it down.
Understood. I have follow-on questions, I think, for another day around public utility commissions, but we'll have to wait on that. Thank you, Brian and Kendall. Arby, over to you. As the global leader of the IFC on the IFC's approach towards hydrogen, you can sit and see two different approaches. Mm-hmm. In the United States, we have a hub approach with the different hubs regionally throughout the United States, and Germany has a core network approach. Admittedly, of course, the geographies are very different, and so are the industrial sectors and where they're co-located. Obviously, you have the Köln and North Rhine-Westphalia as an industrial sector in Germany. What do you see as pros and cons and options to learn from that globally when the IFC starts to look at investment and loans globally for either a hub or a regional approach for hydrogen?
Okay, so you took the obvious answer out for me, right? You already mentioned the difference in the size of the country. You know, it's a third of a million square kilometers versus, you know, more than 9 million square kilometers, right? So if we, you know, look at, you know, rather than talking which is the better approach, I think the key is to see that hydrogen as a tool needs to be tailored for what the criticality of the country's needs are, right? So if we look at Germany, for example, the criticality for energy independence, the clean energy availability, energy resilience is much more than the criticality in the US around energy security, right? So the US hubs can focus more on enabling industrial action, which is much closer in terms of reality to deploying hydrogen. Also in terms of, you know, the cost barrier that clean hydrogen has to meet, I think the energy market is much more challenging than the industrial market, especially where there is no alternative to hydrogen in industries, right? So I think this is what is the big difference between, you know, how Germany is approaching it and how the US is approaching it, is the needs of the country. What are the, you know, critical aspects, and how does the country expect to meet the NDC commitments that they have made? And there are about 50 plus countries that have, you know, national hydrogen strategies, Many of them also have followed up with roadmaps. And if we look at it, even though we tend to think of hydrogen as a homogeneous industry, the customization for the status of the country and what the country needs, I think that's critical. And that's what we see as a difference between this German approach and the U.S. regional hub approach.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, the pipeline network in North Rhine-Westphalia, as it goes up into Rotterdam and Antwerp, is very different than you would have in the U.S. And obviously here I'm in Vienna, Österreich, in Austria, and we actually can get propylene here all the way shipped in from Rotterdam on pipe.
Right.
So it's very interesting, very different markets. One thing I'm also curious about, there are incentives beyond tax incentives here in the EU. In Germany, we have emissions trading mechanisms, the ETS, emissions trading system. Well, in the US, we don't yet have carbon credits for clean hydrogen options.
Right.
Do you have any thoughts on that? And does the IFC recommend carbon credits or carbon finance more broadly as one of the options, policy options for the countries and regions you're working in?
Right. Okay. So I think, the decarbonization, so we need to keep in mind, this is a hydrogen forum. We're all talking about hydrogen, interested in hydrogen, but we shouldn't forget that our ultimate goal is decarbonization, is climate action. And hydrogen is one of the tools that we have. So when we look at, tailoring, incentives and all this, as a businessman, who would say no to incentives, right? But, we need to be a little more flexible and creative about how we tailor these incentives. So if we look at, the development of infrastructure, the production credits, and all of those things, I think that's enabling hydrogen. But if we look at it from the demand side, from the application side, we saw the slide from Sunitha, talking about what are the various sectors that hydrogen can feed into. And if we look inside those sectors, there is a whole diversity of different applications. And then if we remember that the key for us is to decarbonize those applications, at that point, it's not hydrogen, it's decarbonizing those applications, right? We need to let the private sector, the industry, figure out what is the best tool to decarbonize a certain application. So rather than being prescriptive on that end with pushing hydrogen into things that may not make sense and trying to throw money behind them, it is trying to encourage those. So from the demand side, I think there are two kinds of interventions that we can think of. One is that in applications that already use hydrogen today, globally we use about 100 million tons of gray hydrogen. So if we can incentivize those applications to transition to green, where we know there is no market risk, there is no application development risk, there is no placement risk, right? And the second thing is, if we look at these applications and we say, what are the energy intensive applications and how can we disincentivize them in order to wean away from fossil fuels and go more towards cleaner solutions, including that of hydrogen. I think that would be the better approach to take. And sorry, there was a question around carbon markets and carbon credits. So we think that adding carbon trading, carbon markets, and adding a stream of revenue to these projects is very critical, right? Because ideally we would wave a magic wand and nobody would emit carbon and we will all be happy, right? But we are not going to be able to do that. We are going to have to implement solutions, even if some of them may not be exactly perfect, that will help us buy additional time and put us on a transition pathway. So I think these emissions caps, trading schemes, carbon voluntary markets, prescribed markets, I think those are all integral tools for us to implement climate action. And we as IFC, we are working on all aspects of those climate action tools.
Thank you. That's a very nice and concrete answer. Greatly appreciated, as it is for me, and as I hope for many people in the audience, whether in person or those of you who are virtual. My next question goes to you, Martin. The electric vehicle market, and obviously the fuel cell market also, face some uncertainty. You have competition that's increasing globally with Chinese competitors, but other regions are also producing vehicles and trucks that you're competing against. And you have to balance that with the slow build out of charging networks. Can you talk about how you look at that trade-off? If you were in a sales call and you're selling a heavy-duty hydrogen truck to me, how do you respond to me if I say, well, there's no infrastructure and we're in California?
No, thanks a lot, Gabriel, for that question. And I think it's a nice one to answer, but I would love always to try to put it into easy and understandable words, because the topic of hydrogen and the ecosystem is always very, very complex if you want to explain it, very complex. And I loved from Sunita Satyapal before also this 111 slide saying it's 1 kilogram for one decade, right, of help me, dollar of hydrogen. So I think that's a quite simple thing. And I want to inspire you with a planetary view on that, because the question was already very, very much on the regional level. So the energy is limitless because we are consuming from our sun the hydrogen. The sun is consisting of 92% just hydrogen, right? And this energy is for free. It's hitting the earth. We're using it in photovoltaic systems, solar powered, then also wind and water energy. In the end, everything is fueled by our sun, right? And we are here on this planet trying to use it, not with fossil fuels. Of course, that was also the impact by the sun, but we are trying to transfer this energy now into something for a better future, for less CO2, because it's for free, right? And I love the job that also you are doing, having electrolyzers, having also wind systems, to put this into the context, whether it is energy market, that is one part of the solution, but also in our case, trucking and transportation for people, for goods. And saying that all our wealth here, so you're having in front of you a coffee or a cup of water, that was someday transported from a production space where exactly these cups or these coffee was just harvested and brought here onto these tables. Also the tables, they were brought by transporters or trucks here, right? The ceiling, the whole carpet, everything was transported someday. And of course, in the past, it was always diesel-powered trucks. Not only in the US, it was in China, it was in Germany, in Europe. So all our wealth is based on this transportation and the whole logistics, right? So that's a bigger context. It's just, sometimes you need to call it out so you understand the impact of all of that. So everything that was diesel powered and diesel transported in the past, now we are talking about electric vehicles and fuel cell powered vehicles, which are also electric vehicles from a technical point of view. That will be in the future definitely in a mix solved by electric, but also, in my opinion, a big amount of hydrogen powered vehicles. And just to give you a little bit of context about how many of these vehicles are out in Europe. So it's 56 million, the fleet of buses, transporters, trucks rolling around today still with diesel. And it's a multiple of this amount here in the US because the fleet is larger here. Every year, 1.1 million trucks in the US are registered. Nowadays, still with a focus on diesel. And I bet 2030, 2045, 2050, these will be not diesel anymore, but that will be hopefully also quantum vehicles from our end. But it will be a lot of battery, electric, and fuel cell powered vehicles with hydrogen. And that is the key. It's a global solution needed for that, also creating jobs. In the end, yes, we are here, but in the end, you need to pay your bills, you need to pay your rent, and it needs to be a total cost of ownership approach here. We're having all this nice device from Apple in our pockets, right? But it is designed in California, but it's manufactured in China, right? So China is also supporting in many, many ways the technology, but also the, let's call it, development for everything that is also relevant for Europe, for the US, for Germany. And we should collaborate also in a deeper sense in that. So I think there is a competition, but I think when there is a competition, it brings down prices, cost. In the end, customers will have a big advantage having 1 kilogram for $1 maybe in the future. And today we are not yet there. I know that. And that's also the question from our big customers, such as the Swedish company of IKEA. IKEA is, for example, delivering with their trucks that are zero emission, both battery electric, but also fuel cell powered with hydrogen to their customers, you know, the cupboards, the couches, in a sustainable way, and they are committed. So the whole solution will be, you know, it needs to be a demand. It needs to be the uptake and technology, right? Supported by politics, government, and in the end, also the machines, right? Whether it's trucks, buses, also these need to be available. And we are part of that, dedicating to our customers the possibility, take an electric vehicle, but also take a fuel cell powered, hydrogen powered vehicle for your solution. And if you're having big hydrogen amounts available, like big cities are, because they are burning, for example, their wastes, and it's waste to hydrogen that they are creating. Otherwise, it would be just, you know, disappearing into the air. But they are transforming something that is there to something that is maybe not 100% green, but it is better than just burning it. So it's a multiple of solutions, and the uptake, the demand, but also then the availability with the network and with the, in the end, 360-degree ecosystem will make it work in a Chinese context, in a European and German context, but also in the US context. And yes, Chinese technology is quite sophisticated, but I think in the fuel cell, but also electrolyzer space, Germany, especially with Siemens, with colleagues from Bosch, but also others in Europe. There are some French companies also, and Ballard Power here in the North American context are strong players, and I'm not scared. I'm really looking forward, because we're having here a chance in a collaborative global way to solve the future transportation for all of us. I
think a follow-up question.
A sufficient answer to you, Gabriel.
Yeah, it is great. A follow-up question. It's a bit of a trade secret, so please wave me off and laugh at me if I can't answer it. So if it's 1 to 1 to 1, is a good number. At what price is it $1.2 a kilogram that your truck break even with a diesel? In other words, at what point do heavy-duty hydrogen trucks have a break even with diesel trucks on the road?
Yeah, it's a fair question because it's permanently asked by our customers. So nowadays, of course, if you are shooting out CO2 into the air and don't take care about what is then in the end also ESG conform or also CO2 cost conform, then you can just, of course, never beat currently a diesel truck. It is changing. So we did internal calculations that there will be a break even in year 2026, 2027, where we'll be seeing the break even. Why?
Very soon.
There is very soon, and it's CO2 cost, but also there is bans that we are seeing, and there will be bans for diesel-powered vehicles. So in the passenger vehicle markets, like cities in Paris, but also some streets in Hamburg, you're not allowed anymore to drive with a diesel-powered vehicle that is not sufficiently, you know, having the CO2 or the particle regulations anymore. So they are banned from the streets and banned from the cities. We'll be seeing more of that. So I think also from a political point of view, that is supporting a lot the change and the disruption from diesel to battery electric, but also especially hydrogen fuel cell powered vehicles. The hydrogen fuel cell powered vehicles do have a big advantage when it comes to long haul. So everything that goes beyond 400, 500 miles and super heavy duty transfers of goods. So West Coast to East Coast, it is, I think, very painful to permanently stop and recharge a battery electric truck. And I give you just an example with a hydrogen powered vehicle. You can drive from Oslo to Munich, who is familiar with the European context of distances, or from Barcelona to Munich on one go with one shot without stopping for recharging or refueling. So I think that is 3 times from LA to Las Vegas and back. And I think that is, a USP for hydrogen.
It's a bit off topic here in Austria and Lower Austria where I lived. It's the shipping center for Central and Eastern Europe. So I'm assuming I'll see more Quantron vehicles like I saw 2 weeks ago when I was cycling through the city and your IKEA truck was in front of me.
Fantastic.
Good.
So we're not just a PowerPoint company. Happy to hear that.
Yeah. So no, thank you for that. Let's talk about safety. In the U.S. context, I believe it was last year, the year before, 45 people were injured, I believe it was, when there was a hydrogen leakage that occurred in Mississippi. Now, how do we get over how do we educate the broader community that hydrogen is safe and that, you know, Hindenburg is something of the past? How do we talk and communicate with our clients so they understand better that this is a safe fuel source? That's for you, Martin.
Happy to cover that. So I think you need to educate people. So whether it's in context of universities here, in the end, it's all chemistry and physics, and you can store hydrogen safely in carbon, in our carbon storages, highly compressed at 350 or 700 bars or liquefied. And in the end, it is not more dangerous than it is, for example, with normal fuel like petrol or diesel. It needs just to be handled in the right way. We need the DIN or ISO standards on a national or international level. And with that, I think also with big players that are also sitting here in the room, we can secure that there is no damage to human being or mankind created by hydrogen.
And I just wanted to jump in from a safety perspective, but also maybe take an offshoot from the education people perspective. I mean, safety is our #1 priority. I mean, full stop. So of course, everything that we do in our factories and with our customers, safety is #1. But you mentioned the education piece, and Gabriel, I don't know if you're going to go here, and I don't know how much more time we have, but one quick thing I wanted to mention, we talked about infrastructure issues, we talked about permitting challenges. There also is another, I guess you could say, human infrastructure issue. You know, the amount of folks, the amount of workers that we in our space have a hard time finding. And as this new technology evolves, we want to make sure that the education piece, this is a new exciting field to get in terms of how it's going to enable this transition. So just to throw that out there, I think that's probably a topic for a whole nother panel when it comes to qualified workers, a qualified workforce, not only here in the US, but around the world. We face this as a company. Kind of a tough segue from the safety to the people, but I think I just wanted to get that point out before we adjourned here, because that's a critical component of this hydrogen sector to take off, not only here in the US, but around the world.
So to add to that, I think that's an extremely important question, right? So I don't doubt that we will be able to do it safely, but even though we use hydrogen and other chemicals and other gases at high pressures and high temperatures in the industry, we never store them at very high pressures. We never store them under the conditions that we may have to store hydrogen in. So, and that is something where we need to make a lot of improvements, a lot of advances. We need, additional technologies with better metallurgy, better ability to contain and transport high pressure hydrogen safely. We need developments in that area as well.
Well, this is fascinating. I believe we could talk a lot more about details and projects, but of course, as you know, the worst place the moderator has to be is between you and a nice lunch. And with a beautiful snowy day, you can enjoy yourself, relax, know that you don't have to go back to the office because most people are not in the office today. So of course, thank you very much for coming to the event in person. And I'm really sorry I could not be there with you. And I do have a bag filled with chocolates for all the panelists, for all of you. So one point in the next year, you'll get some chocolates from me, and they'll be fresh chocolate. They won't be the same chocolate sitting here. Okay, so we just have a couple minutes. So I'd like to close off the event and give each of you 1 minute to say, what would you like to occur with the U.S. Germany Climate and Energy Partnership? And it's a formal partnership between the U.S. government and the German government. And we're here all today in the same room, whether virtually or remote, coordinating, collaborating. Do you have what would be something that'd be helpful? Like one thing that would be helpful that could occur by June 30, 2024. So it's kind of an abbreviated timeline on that. So I will let we'll go with Martin first, and then Well, then we'll go with Kendall, RB, and then we'll close with Brian. Okay? So Martin, over to you. What's one thing you'd like the German-U.S. governmental partnership on climate energy to do to support green hydrogen by January 30, 2024?
So if I had one wish free, so
yeah,
independently, and I'm not a political person, whatever happens by the end of this year here in the US, let's build bridges, right? Let's connect. We're sitting, at least from our point of view, close to Munich, but we're representing the German, the European context of a greener future. And I think biggest contributors on this planet are the US. So let's build bridges. I'm very happy also seeing Christoph Szymionik, but also Sunita since years and decades working on this topic. So thumbs up for that. And I think we need exactly all of us here in this room to build these bridges, to maintain them, and to have a greener future where hydrogen is a core added value for a better future for our kids and future generations. And that's why I'm also happy to be here. Thanks.
Well, that's a great, thank you for that. Cleaner future, by 2026, and coordinating pathways in the next couple of months. RB, what would you think?
Little bit of a tall ask, but
yes, of course.
We think that it's very important to synchronize regulations, especially around banking regulations, to make sure that the products that are produced, they are intertradable, they are tradable between the countries. It's important to synchronize regulations and requirements around supply chains, the supply chain components, the requirements and all that, as well as have common standards and methodologies for being able to account for and market carbon credits that would come out of these kind of activities. I think the policy synchronization, the ability for businesses to transparently work across the borders, I think that would be very important.
That's a great suggestion. So for those of you looking in the audience, I'm looking at you. There's some very smart people there, much smarter than me. So let's see if we can get that started in the next couple months. Kendall, what would you like to have happen by June 30, 2024?
Yes, and I imagine we're all going to say something along the lines of collaboration of some sort. So I'll just go ahead and say that as mine. So continued collaboration, of course, the share of technology, cooperation on international standards. And then one guiding principle, I think, is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good here. So it's going to take all of us. We need all stakeholders involved, governments, private sector, industry, environmental groups as well. Really, it's going to take all of us to come to a common sense approach for the future. So it's going to take time. We're not going to be having hydrogen trucks on the road tomorrow, and just know that this is a long-term or a long game, but we're all here in this room and doing our day jobs to work towards this issue. So I'll leave you with that.
Thank you for that. And Brian, for you.
When you go last, everybody already says all the good stuff. So I'll just be quick. I'll just say you said collaborate. I'll say alignment was what I'd like to see. And just the understanding, this isn't a competition. It's competition in some sense of it, but this isn't the US versus Germany or the US versus the EU. I think we all need to focus on working together to kind of make this happen. I think we've heard that theme already. So not a competition, it's more alignment, it's more of a partnership. And that's the spirit of this event. So that's great.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. So with that, in the spirit of collaboration, partnership, and coordination, I wish all of you a wonderful lunch. Again, I apologize for not being there. Thank you, Dr. Satya Paul, and thank you, Christian, I think you'll be closing now. And thank you, Chris and Mike Ryan from Georgetown, and of course, Patrick, thank you very much. And on behalf of Responsible Alpha, thank you very much.
What a wonderful, wonderful couple of panels plus keynote speaker we've had today. I'm Mike Ryan, and I'm here because the course that Brad Jensen, my colleague, introduced, which Chris was a student in since he officially finished up in December, called Social Action Project, is my course. And so I'm happy to say to you that here at this business school in the middle of the 1990s, and late 1990s, a decisive decision about the school and its curriculum was made when we decided that the school would always end a program with a global capstone project involving global business, that it would be a distinctive approach to business education that we at Georgetown would commit ourselves to. That means that every single master's student in the variety of master's degrees that we've created since then, whether it's the master's degree in management or finance, or we have a new one in sustainable development, and we'll have a health one emerging soon. In all of them, we conclude the program with some kind of a global business capstone in which the key is collaboration. For many years now, Global Business Experience in the MBA program has collaborated with companies in Berlin. And so in March, we will have about 40 of our MBA students who have been working for a couple of months with companies in Berlin, both German companies as well as American companies who are operating in Berlin. We'll be going to many other cities around the world in March, and we do in a variety of our programs. As my colleague, Professor Jensen, said at the outset, the International Business and Policy Program is a collaboration itself between the School of Foreign Service, which you cannot see because the blinds are drawn because it's too bright outside at the moment, but it's the next building over. And the idea was to integrate the curricula of the business school and the School of Foreign Service, and to do so in such a way to create, we hope, a kind of special kind of degree that makes sense within the context of Georgetown University and our locational advantage of Washington, D.C. But when we created that degree program about 8 years ago, Dean Paul Almeida, who along with Dean Hellman at School of Foreign Service, established the program. He said, with this particular capstone, let's give it a particular name with a particular commitment. And that name is Social Action Project. And what he said was, let's live our values. Let's live our values. So I think we can all agree today that this indeed has been an ideal social action project with this theme, because there can be no greater social action, can there be, than related to issues of climate and trying to introduce the significant amount of change in markets and institutions to get where we need to go. We're grateful. Chris told the story. Chris told us his personal story. Our social action projects are extremely diverse. We've had nearly 150 of them in these 7 years so far, and the 8th contingent, the 8th cohort, will be arriving in a couple of weeks on this campus. They'll be in rooms over there. We've had about 150 of them. We sometimes work with the World Bank, Inter-American Development Bank, African Development Bank, with companies. We work with Fluence, which I think once upon a time, it might still be partially owned by Siemens. We've worked with Medtronic. We've worked with Starbucks on sustainability. We work with Save the Children. We work with U.S. Agency for International Development. We've done a lot of projects, all because students said, this is what I want to work on. This is what I'm committed to. This is how I want to live my values in this program. With this particular program, we needed to collaborate with the right people. And so we collaborated first with my friend, Gabriel Toomey from Responsibility Alpha. I think this is the 5th year in a row where a team from, or a project involving Master of International Business and Policy has had Gabriel as an advisor. Grateful to Gabriel and the expertise year after year he brings to a project in the program. This year, because of Chris's interests in Germany, this was the opportunity to finally create what I had long been hoping for, which is a collaboration with the representative German industry and trade. That opportunity, though, to put on an event enabled us to reach out to a new institution here at Georgetown, the Baratta Center for Global Business. Established this year, this event is exactly the kind of thing that the Baratta Center has already had an active agenda this year and will have a continuing active agenda in the years ahead. With Professor Ernst and Anil leading the Baratta Center, the idea is let's do events that create opportunities for business leaders, policymakers and administrators, and civil society to come together in one room, work together, talk together, try to find ways to find real-world solutions. The Baratta Center, then, we're grateful to them for enabling us to come together and have an opportunity for collaboration about a meaningful topic about hydrogen in the U.S. German relationship. So at Georgetown, we're all grateful for the collaborations that have taken place to bring us all here together. And with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Christoph Schemenak, the CEO of the Representative of German Industry and Trade, or as the guy I like to say is, he is the Representative of German Industry and Trade. Christoph, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mike, so much for this kind introduction. He mentioned it, I'm Christoph Schemenak, I'm the head of the Representative of German Industry and Trade, or briefly, or RGIT. Good afternoon, everyone, dear friends, colleagues, and distinguished guests. And to give you a quick overview what RGIT is, actually, it's a liaison office of the two main industry associations in Germany. One is the Federation of German Industries, the BDI, and the other one is the German Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the DIHK. It's a real pleasure to see all of you here today for an event whose spirit of cooperation and transatlantic enterprise is close to our heart at RGIT. This is what we are standing for. So naturally, it was an easy decision for us to agree to co-organize the event with when Mike and Chris approached us. We are in Washington, D.C. since 1988, and since that time, RGIT has worked for 3.5 decades already to deepen German-American trade and investment, as well as deepening the transatlantic marketplace. Probably more than ever, international economic policy matters. It really sets the framework for our country's cooperation and friendship, which remains strong, not just in our security cooperation and our shared value and our shared cultural history, but also very much in our deep economic ties. American and German companies act in the spirit of transatlanticism every day. This relationship is made up of 5,800 German-owned affiliates in the United States. They call the United States their home. Together, their investment stands at more than $600 billion these days. They're creating over 900,000 jobs in all 50 states. And also here in the District of Columbia, we create 2,100 jobs. German companies invest over $11 billion annually on research and development in the US, 3/4 of which are directed towards the manufacturing sector. German-American trade keeps growing too, and today amounts to $220 billion. The broader transatlantic economic relationship between the US and Europe is the largest trading relationship in the world. It is this certainty of a strong relationship built on economic, cultural, and security cooperation that is more important than ever in times of multiple international crises. Investing in this relationship is vital and secures our shared prosperity. Transatlantic economic integration is based on a trusting business environment, a reliable framework, and open markets, and this is what RGIT stands for. With today's event and many other events and conversations we had over the last month, we are extending this spirit of cooperation to the energy sector. The way I see it is that the need for greater US-German cooperation and trade in energy is twofold. Firstly, climate change is already threatening the basis of our business. And secondly, the acute task of shoring up energy security for Germany. The consequences of global climate change are already affecting both Germany and the US. In both countries, we are accelerating the energy transition to ensure that our children and our business will live in a sustainable world. For business, this includes the need to reach climate neutrality, a monumental task indeed, but I have no doubt whatsoever that German and American business with their know-how at the forefront of clean tech manufacturing will, and they are already stepping up to the plate. As we have heard today, industry defossilization is a complicated task. It involves transitioning from unabated fossil energy sources to renewable and clean sources of electricity, but also decarbonizing supply chains and transportation as well. Also today, it has become very apparent that hydrogen is a vital energy source for this transition to go forward. It is versatile in its applications and comes in various forms with its, oh, that's a complicated word for the German here, derivatives. And I'm not a chemistry guy. Well, the lively debate around the rules for its production, not just recently here in the US, but also in the EU over the past years, shows the importance of hydrogen. If the US and Germany work closely together, our industries are well positioned to make the hydrogen ramp up a tremendous success. The second reason why hydrogen is uniquely important to the transatlantic relationship is Germany's energy security predicament following Russia's unprovoked war on Ukraine. Russia's attack is a danger to the European order of peaceful cooperation. Germany, with its strong manufacturing sector, was particularly affected by this as Putin leveraged energy in his attempt to disrupt the European economy. In a coordinated effort, the EU, the German government, and the business community, Germany entirely weaned off of Russian pipeline gas, formerly a cornerstone of its energy supply. The United States played a crucial role in facilitating this transition. Together, we were able to set the stage for future economic cooperation in the energy sector, chief among them LNG, clean tech goods, and of course, hydrogen. The German business community needs hydrogen to future-proof its energy security, and it needs a lot. From what we have heard today, the hydrogen sector ramp-up is accelerating on both sides of the Atlantic. This spells good news for transatlantic economic cooperation. Trade between the United States and Germany is a huge success story, and it can serve as a vehicle to accelerate the energy transition and create energy security at the same time. Hydrogen particularly is emerging as an energy commodity that can and will serve both purposes simultaneously. In that spirit of a strong and reliable transatlantic relationship, let us broaden our trade relationship, let us deepen our mutual ties through more investment in both Germany and in the US, and let us not forget what underlies this partnership, our shared values as democracies and believers in free enterprise. Today's event, the U.S. German Hydrogen Forum, has impressively demonstrated this relationship. And I would like to thank all of our distinguished speakers, panelists, and moderators for making it such a success. A big thank you to Sunita Satyapal for her introductory remarks and her ongoing engagement with the German business community. Thank you. Thank you to our moderators, Samantha and Gabriel, for steering today's panels. Thank you to all our panelists, Christine Falken-Großer, Justina Gallegos, Alexei Tatarenko and Susanna Moreira, as well as Brian Raymond, Kendall Stevenson, Martin Lischka, and Arbi Balaji for sharing your insights and taking time from your busy schedules. I would also like to thank the US-Germany Climate and Energy Partnership for supporting this event. This partnership was launched in 2021 by President Biden and then Chancellor Angela Merkel as part of both countries' ongoing work together on addressing the threat of climate change. And special acknowledgements, of course, are in order to the Baratta Center for Global Business for their support in logistics and venue. Thanks also to the MA International Business and Policy offered by the McDonough School of Business and Walsh School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University for supporting today's event. Thank you to all principals and staff involved for their work to realize the Hydrogen Forum. In this context, I also would like to personally thank Michael Ryan and Bradford Jensen for moving the idea of this event forward. Thank you also to Gabriel Thomi and Mike Kroll at Responsible Alpha for coming on as a co-organizer. My special thanks goes also to my staff, Patrick McCone and Amal Khaled, for positioning our office as a leader in transatlantic energy cooperation. And I'm coming here to the end, and lunch is almost there. Ultimately, and of course, there's Christopher Perry to thank. Where is he? There. Thank you, Chris, for spearheading it all and your personal interest in the German business community and your dedication to the German-American friendship. In your introductory remarks, you described it very nicely, how dedicated you are to the German-American friendship. And we need transatlantic pillars like you to move this transatlantic relationship forward, or as Martin said, build bridges. And congratulations on this amazing capstone project today, and of course, on your graduate degree. And now that you all clapped, I also thank all the audience that you are here today, both in person and online, for your interest and participation. I look forward to speaking to you over lunch in our networking session. Without further ado, I will leave it now to you to grab some lunch and mingle for some more conversation. A heartfelt Dankeschön for making this event such a success. Thank you.